Finally, protests. You had tens of thousands of people, possibly a few million people, hundreds of thousands, I don't know how many. There are a lot of people gathering in the streets to protest against police brutality, to protest systemic racism in law enforcement, to protest, or certainly there to mourn the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And you can even throw in Ahmaud Arbery in that as well. And just the number of black people who have died at the hands of police officers or white police officers. And the most interesting aspect of all of this is the glaring hypocrisy that we've seen in how this has been covered by the media. Of course, it's a very noble, virtuous thing to assemble, to practice your First Amendment rights, to have the freedom of speech, to say what you want without the fear of repercussion from government authorities. The problem is we still have the coronavirus pandemic going on. It's not like that has completely gone away. And we're starting to see a lot of these protesters gather together. And look, you have people wearing masks, and that's a good thing. That does help stop the spread of coronavirus. But you also have to be social distancing. And not everyone has been practicing social distancing. And what we learned from the World Health Organization just in the last week, initially they said if you're an asymptomatic carrier, you can't transmit the coronavirus to another human being. They used the words very rare. And then like a day later, they had to correct that and say, actually, yeah, you can still transmit it. And using very rare was sort of a confusing word to use. A confusing phrase, I should say. It's also not like every protester has been peaceful. There's certainly been hijackings of these peaceful protests by bad faith actors, whether they're part of Antifa, whether they're more radical leftists that don't ascribe to any particular ideology, whether they're just trying to loot businesses, harm business owners, or even kill them, which has happened to a number of people. David Dorn is one of them. He was actually not even a business owner. He was a 77-year-old retired police captain in St. Louis who was trying to protect his friend's pawn shop. And he was shot and killed. Terrible story. And there have been other instances of people being killed during these riots. Of course, these protests have gotten more peaceful since the immediate outbreak of violence in that first weekend since George Floyd died. But at the same time, the way the media is looking at this, they are setting a new standard. Only about a month ago, you had protesters gathering at state capitals, essentially protesting their government's lockdown orders. And they weren't wearing masks. They weren't practicing social distancing. And ultimately, they were being pretty reckless. I don't think it was a very smart idea to protest then. But the media was pretty sure to condemn them because they were protesting Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat, and they were gathering at state capitals around the country. The problem is public health experts and officials have since come out in support of these protests against police brutality, essentially saying that it is more pressing and more urgent to protest, systemic racist policies in our law enforcement and criminal justice systems than the coronavirus. And they really boxed themselves into a corner because as soon as they said that, President Trump was like, all right, I'm basically going to open up and start holding rallies again. And now you got, people, public health experts, and you got Democrats basically being like, what is he doing? He's going to put more and more people at risk of coronavirus. Like, dude, you can't have it both ways. You really can't. As soon as you basically made that position that, these protests are fine to combat racism and police brutality, Republicans are going to take that and run. Now you're boxed into a corner. You've ruined your credibility, for one. And I'm talking about public health experts, the ones who supposedly have been calling the shots over the last few months about coronavirus and saying that it's not good to go out and you should stay home and protect your grandparents, make sure that they don't get coronavirus. Yet they've basically come out and politicized their whole position, their whole industry, and now no one's going to believe them going down the line. They've turned into the World Health Organization in a sense, because the World Health Organization, for those who aren't aware, obviously a very political organization. Their director general, Dr. Tedros, he appointed Robert Mugabe, the Zimbabwean dictator. He was already dead, by the way, but he appointed him as essentially a goodwill ambassador, knowing full well that Zimbabwe's public health had crumbled and disease was spreading and they weren't doing anything to really address it. Coronavirus here, in this case, World Health Organization, essentially was working with the Chinese government, and either the Chinese government lied to them or they were a willing participant in basically spreading the lie to the rest of the world that the coronavirus cannot be transmitted from human to human. And that is a real tweet that was up in January of 2020. And essentially caught everyone flat-footed to handle and combat the coronavirus. So when you look at it, these protests happening right now, you're going to see a second spike of coronavirus cases. You're already seeing it. You're seeing it in Florida. You're seeing it around the country. You're seeing it initially, it was earlier this week, it was in 9 states. Now that's growing. That's expanded to Florida, unfortunately, because they originally had eased restrictions on essentially they're allowing people to go out and reopening their economy. Despite the fact that 9 states had reopened, or despite the fact that 9 states had a rise in cases, despite the varying instances of them reopening their economies, Florida's going to catch the most heat for it. You just know it's going to happen. So, look, the main figure to look at is hospitalizations. If hospitalizations go up, the number of people who have coronavirus and hospitalizations go up, that might be a little bit more concerning. But I will say this, because I've had friends who've had surgery and they test everyone for coronavirus. So if that person happens to be tested positive while they're going in for, say, an elective surgery or an emergency surgery, they may count that as a hospitalization of coronavirus. So just to read in between the lines right there, because there is going to be a spike in some way, shape, or form. And while President Trump has pledged to not shut down the economy a second time around if there's a spike in coronavirus, we do work in a federalist system. There is a chance that many other states will just shut things down again. And you might have local governments do that as well. I mean, look at the city of Los Angeles. They planned on having their shutdown for at least 3 months, or at least they announced that a month ago. So that's 2 more months. We'll see what happens. And it's unfortunate, but that's the world we live in. And if you even look at Chaz, the Seattle Autonomous Zone, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, it's not like they're practicing social distancing. They're certainly not practicing all of them wearing masks. I mean, they're all basically gathering together in a co-op to have free food. I mean, if one person has coronavirus there, they could all get it. And that extends to people who are reporting on it. People who, say, like my friend Julio Rosas from townhall.com, can certainly bring it back with him to either his family or his friends, or to his place of employment. I mean, it's really unfortunate that these protests have been marred by coronavirus. We shouldn't have to worry about it. The only thing that they should have to be worried about is ensuring that they're safe and they can vocally or express themselves in a peaceful civic way. But we don't operate in a vacuum. And you can't look at these protests in the same way. And you know that by participating in these protests, you're almost certainly exposing yourself to a deadly virus, in which you may not necessarily be hurt by it, but you could transmit that to other people that you love. And because of the wildly unexpected nature that is this virus, we don't know who it's going to harm.